Grace and peace, and welcome to our program today, Faith, Family, and Finance. This is the last word, and I'm Dennis Scoffin. Today is an interesting program, and I want to talk about several issues that are important to our discussion today. One of the most important issues is that today is what we call traditionally Ash Wednesday. It is something that is traditionally on the church calendar, high church calendar. Many people have looked at Ash Wednesday as primarily an activity of the church that is more denominational than it is anything else. And so we've looked at the this idea of Ash Wednesday as something entirely different. We have been discussing with this idea of 3 points of this to our discussion. That is our faith, our family, and our finances. So this I'm focusing back on faith again. Let's talk about Ash Wednesday. It marks the beginning of a period in the church calendar which is called Lent. It's 46 days before Easter Sunday. Lent particularly is a 40-day season, not counting the Sundays, marked by three things: repentance, fasting, and reflection. One of the things that's not discussed a lot about Ash Wednesday, especially in the religious community, is what takes place on the Tuesday before Ash Wednesday. Traditionally, down in New Orleans, it's called Mardi Gras. And Mardi Gras is a time that, in terms of us being religious, we get all of our philosophy out, all of our discussion out, all of our sins out of the way, so then we can then sin as much as you can, because on Wednesday we're going to get religious. So we have this paradox between where we are and what we're doing, places the church in this somewhat highly contagious position of being religious and secular at the same time. That's where the church in America is. It is a paradox because it spends its time just and being secular at the same time. So as a nation, we celebrate Mardi Gras, partying, dancing, do all the sins that we can, because on Wednesday we get spiritual. We take the ashes, we rub them on our head, and this period we call Lent. It's a 40-day period, represents Christ's time of temptation in the wilderness, where he fasted and where Satan tempted him. Lent asks as believers to set aside a time each year for fasting, marking an intentional season of focus on Christ's life, ministry, and sacrifice. I think that's probably where it goes. There is no history of Lent in the Bible, for instance, in terms of it being a Bible principle. There is no history of the Bible, but it had its beginning probably after the Council of Nicaea. I've been talking church in the first century. If you don't know a little bit about church history, you won't be able. Everything is not in the Bible, and there are some things that are scripturally in the Bible. There are other things developed over time after the writing of the books of the Bible. Most of us, in terms of really understanding where apostolic tradition is, apostolic times, will have to understand that canonization. Tomorrow, I'll talk more about the canonization of the Bible. Books that are considered canonical weren't done until close to the fourth century. So a lot of the practices or things we call in the church calendar, and since we're not really particularly talking about the church calendar, but we're talking about an event outside the church calendar, we can talk about some things that relatively talks about where the church is. But the cultural influence, American culture is a paradox, religious and secular. Well, let's go back and talk about this. So Lent, then, this period that begins today, period of fasting, a period of prayer, leading up in this Easter season to the period before Christ, was practiced probably close to the fourth century after probably the Council of Nicaea. Now, giving some background to the Council of Nicaea, after the church started evolving after the first century, it became known as what we call the Orthodox Church, which meant right doctrine because there were so many doctrinal viewpoints, so many sects that were beginning to come out of the first century that was trying to put an umbrella and a standard on where Christianity was developing. And as we start to develop and understand that viewpoint and the things that evolved around that, there's some things that were extremely powerful. What became known as orthodox or the prevailing viewpoint of the church got to be secularized in terms of the various teachers that were trying to teach, that was helping the church that was coming out of persecution. So actually, when Christianity actually becomes legalized in Pope Saint Victor I and Athanasius, who seem to all start writing about this period of Lent during their ministries. After 313, the church kind of became more structured in where it was going. So by 325, when it had its first church council, bringing all these factions together so it could have the council deciding on where the church was going to believe, what it was going to believe, how it was going to believe, summed up into one important doctrinal message, which was called the Apostles' Creed. I don't have time to get into all these viewpoints. Some of these things we're going to have to shape and talk about American culture. And I'm going to, I guess, in the talks that I'm presenting, I'm just really kind of giving you a background of the fasting and the Lent season there. The Council of Nicene in 325 AD, the church decided to formally put itself into some Orthodox Christian idea of where the church was going, what the church is going to believe, how the church is going to develop itself, what all the different fractions of the church is going to come together. Contrary to popular opinion, although Constantine may have called the meeting because of doctrinal concerns that was in the church, especially on what we call the Christological doctrine, the doctrine of who Jesus really was, his hypostatic union, the various viewpoints of what percentage of Jesus was God, what percentage was man, how the church was going to look at that, how it was going to view. There was a deacon. Uh, bishop. Well, I don't have time to get into all of that today, even though I would love to discuss it. There's some other things we need to discuss that's important because where we are in terms of our denominational viewpoint on Lent and seeing where this is one important viewpoint. America's religious landscape is being reshaped not only by the nones, those who have no religious affiliation, that's a new viewpoint of people in the United States, especially who are called nuns who have no, and then the nons, non-denominational Christians whose congregations are not under an organized church government. So we have the nuns and we have the nuns. So nons and the nuns and nuns. Wow. It's getting church is and what the church is and how the church is reflecting a lot on that. So that we have this paradox again, this paradox that brings us back to where we are with Christianity, this cultural paradox in America. I did mention in the beginning to share this on your social media platform. You can go to my YouTube channel, Bishop DMG, subscribe, and you get notices about what's going on. We'll talk more about Lent. Churches who celebrate it and churches that don't celebrate it. For today, there are Pentecostal churches who celebrate Lent. Well, we're going to get back to this seasonal thing and where we are with the church as we begin this discussion and keep it going.